Hello, everyone. The European Union and the United States are among each other's biggest partners, with bilateral trade exceeding $1 trillion in 2023. The total investment between the two sides is $7.17 trillion. They are also important allies of each other since World War II. However, when it comes to national interests, everyone looks out for themselves first. Today, we will explore why the EU threatened to launch a trade war with the US. Prior to these developments, many American steel and aluminum manufacturing companies had to close because they could not compete with cheap products from abroad. President Joe Biden implemented protective measures by imposing import tariffs of 25% and 10%, respectively. Previously, these two commodities were exempt from taxes. As one of the major suppliers to the US, the EU now had to pay taxes on $7.5 billion worth of products. Unable to compete, about half of the companies supplying steel and aluminum to the US had to leave the market. The policy that President Joe Biden implemented is called protectionism, protecting domestic manufacturers by imposing tariffs or import restrictions on foreign companies. Unhappy with the unfair game, the EU retaliated by imposing import duties ranging from 10% to 50% on $4.2 billion worth of goods from the US, including orange juice, bourbon whiskey, and motorcycles. These tit-for-tat actions can be applied for a long time and are called a trade war. In reality, the US and EU fought for the first time since 2004 when both sides subsidized their respective commercial aviation giants, Boeing and Airbus. Each wanted their own corporation to have a competitive edge, so they pumped in money to lower prices to defeat their rival. As a result, both sides suffered losses when they could not maximize profits. Currently, the aforementioned conflicts have been somewhat resolved. However, new disputes have emerged. The Inflation Reduction Act recently passed by the US Congress has caused a wave of opposition in Europe. Specifically, Washington has spent a record $369 billion, accounting for 22% of its annual budget, to support clean energy and combat climate change. One of the main points is that the US will provide middle-income consumers with a huge rebate every time they buy electric cars, trucks, or some clean energy vehicles. They can get up to $7,500 in support for vehicles weighing less than or equal to 14,000 pounds and $40,000 for heavier vehicles. The money will be paid to manufacturers and distributors who will deduct it each time they sell to consumers. The eligibility conditions are: first, the final assembly of electric vehicles must be carried out in North America. Second, the battery of the vehicle must contain minerals mined or recycled on the North American continent. By 2024, at least 50% of the battery components must come from the US, Canada, or Mexico, increasing to 100% by 2028. This is an important factor for electric vehicles as the battery accounts for over 30% of the final price. The US government's goal is to limit China's influence on the battery and rare earth supply chain, promote domestic job creation and manufacturing. However, when the Inflation Reduction Act was announced, leaders of the European Union cried out in despair the economy is already on the brink of collapse. Germany subsidizes businesses to increase competitiveness. Now it's the US' turn. How can they live in peace? Specifically, the US subsidizing electric car costs for citizens also means assisting domestic companies to enable them to lower sales prices to defeat foreign suppliers. The EU is one of the world's leading electric car manufacturers, and the US market is their main destination. Being pushed out of the 332 million consumer market will cause losses of billions of dollars and make things more difficult for the auto industry. Electric cars are currently a global transformation trend because they are good for the environment and reduce dependence on oil and gas. The market is wide open, but the US wants to close it to promote domestic manufacturing. Some EU officials believe the Washington government has violated World Trade Organization rules by discriminating between domestic and foreign companies. Unhealthy competition makes them frustrated and angry at their North American ally. Currently, the US Inflation Reduction Act has been passed and is almost certain to not be withdrawn. Therefore, the EU will have three options to resolve this. First, copying Washington's formula, member states collectively roll out support packages for their electric car manufacturers. This requires consensus. Not everyone will agree. Currently, the entire EU is facing an energy crisis. Governments in the organization have to shoulder the costs for citizens by borrowing debts. 7 major countries in the Union are at risk of bankruptcy. They will not want additional pressure. First Germany, now the US, tomorrow France. They will completely collapse. Second, and simpler, the EU will file a lawsuit and bring the US to the WTO, requiring them to treat partners in North America equally. Currently, the US does not have a free trade agreement with the EU but does with Mexico and Canada. Manufacturers in these two countries also enjoy similar preferences as in the US. Out of alliance, Washington may reconsider. If it fails, the final option will be for EU member states to collectively impose tariffs on goods originating from the US, igniting a new trade war that damages both sides. Amidst the Ukraine war showing no signs of cooling down, infighting among Western allies will become a joke for Russia. Putin will then sit down with popcorn and enjoy the show. There is nothing more foolish than this. In the words of an expert, if policymakers in the US and EU want to reduce their dependence on imports from China and Russia, they should seek to expand trade with each other instead of restricting it. Therefore, Washington's domestic corporate protectionist measures seem inappropriate at this time.